My name is Daniel Mercer, and the events I'm about to describe took place over the course of a single afternoon. An afternoon I keep wishing I had spent anywhere else. I'm 34 years old, I work remotely as a technical editor, and until yesterday, I believed I lived in a quiet, uneventful neighborhood on the north side of town. I've kept count of my words while drafting this opening so I can state plainly, the introduction above is exactly 89 words. I'm giving you that number because the rest of this story hinges on precision, on tiny details that seemed harmless at the time but later became the very things that kept me awake all night. It started around 1:30 in the afternoon. I was halfway through revising a report when I heard a dull, rhythmic knocking from next door. 3 taps, a pause, 2 taps. My neighbor, Mr. Halden, had lived there for about 6 months. Quiet man, maybe mid-50s. The type who keeps his curtains drawn even on sunny days. We'd exchanged words only twice. Both times, he'd spoken softly, almost too softly, with a stiffness that made me think he wasn't used to casual conversation. The knocking wasn't aggressive or loud, just patterned, intentional. It came from his garage, which sits only about 20 feet from my office window. I figured he was fixing something. Tools. Shelving. Maybe a loose board. But the rhythm kept repeating, identical every time. 3 taps. Fuzz. 2 taps. Then silence for about 10 seconds. Then again. After maybe 10 minutes of this, I tried to ignore it. But the sameness of it got under my skin. It wasn't the sound, it was the precision. You know when something is so repetitive that you almost feel like it's being performed for you? That was the vibe. At 1:45, curiosity won. I stepped outside. The air was still, no wind at all, and the warmth of the sun made the narrow strip of lawn between our houses feel oddly claustrophobic, like a hallway with no ceiling. I glanced toward his garage expecting the door to be cracked open. Instead, it was shut tight. The knocking stopped the moment I stepped onto my driveway, so instantly that it made the hairs on the back of my arms rise. I waited a moment. Nothing. I called out, not too loudly, "You all right over there, Mr. Halden?" No answer. Not a sound. Not even movement behind the garage door. But I felt someone was there. Watching. Listening. I can't explain why, I just knew. I took a few steps closer, telling myself I was overthinking it, that maybe he'd dropped something or gone inside. But halfway up the driveway, I heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming from the other side of the garage wall. They matched my pace. When I stopped, they stopped. When I took one step forward, there was the faint creak of weight shifting inside. That was the moment unease shifted into something colder. I backed away, trying to stay casual but feeling anything but. When I reached the sidewalk, the footsteps moved again. 2 slow steps, then a soft dragging sound, like someone adjusting their stance. I didn't say another word. I just went back inside. For a while, I tried to work again, but I kept glancing toward the window. At about 2:15, I saw something that made me freeze mid-breath. His garage door was still closed, but now it had a line of fresh scratches near the bottom, thin, straight, repeated several times in the exact same spacing. Like someone had taken a nail or a screwdriver and drawn the same motion again and again until the metal gave. Those scratches hadn't been there an hour earlier. I would have noticed. The knocking hadn't resumed, but the garage suddenly felt like the brightest thing in my field of view, even though it was shaded. My brain couldn't let it go. If someone was in trouble, I'd feel guilty for ignoring it. If something else was going on, well, I didn't have the language yet for what my body seemed to sense. At 2:30, I made a stupid decision. I told myself I'd simply walk over, knock on the door and check. Something responsible, neighborly, completely normal. I didn't want to involve the police. This wasn't an emergency, just strange. So at 2:32, I went back outside. And the second I stepped onto my driveway, the garage door shuddered. Not fully, just the smallest vibration, like someone had pressed their weight against it from the inside and then released. It happened again. Slight. Controlled. Not an accident. I approached slowly, listening. No footsteps. No talking. Just that same tiny shudder of metal, once every few seconds, like breathing. When I finally reached the door, I lifted my hand and knocked twice. Firm but polite. "Mr. Halden? It's Dan from next door." Silence. I tried again. Nothing. The stillness around me stretched so thin it felt brittle. I leaned forward, close enough to hear even the faintest reply. That was when I realized I could hear something, not from the garage itself, but from the small seam at the bottom where the concrete met the metal. Breathing. Not heavy. Not panicked. Just thrown. Too shallow. Too fast. And too close to the ground, as if someone was lying flat on the concrete with their mouth right near the gap. A chill crawled up my spine, and I forced myself to straighten. My instinct screamed at me to walk away, go back inside, forget the entire thing. But as I turned, the breathing stopped abruptly, not fading, not slowing. Just stopping mid-inhale, in a way no natural breath ever does. I didn't look back. I walked straight to my door with the stiff, robotic movements of someone pretending everything was normal. When I closed the door behind me, my pulse was thudding in my ears. I locked the deadbolt without even thinking. 30 seconds later, 3 taps sounded from the outside wall of my house. Not the garage. My house. 3 taps. 2 taps. The exact same pattern. And that was when I realized the sound wasn't coming from next door anymore. It was coming from directly behind my office wall. I didn't move for a full 10 seconds after the tapping stopped. I just stood there in the narrow hallway between my office and the kitchen, palms sweating, heart tripping over itself. The first thing my brain tried to do was rationalize. Sound carries weird. Maybe the noise wasn't directly behind the wall. Maybe it was outside somewhere, bouncing at an angle. Maybe someone was knocking on a fence post or the side of a trash bin. But deep down I knew I wasn't wrong. The sound had come from the exact height where my office desk sat against the wall. Too specific, too close for coincidence. I forced myself to step back into the office. Not to the window, not toward the shared property line. Just inside enough to see the wall. It looked normal, of course. Smooth drywall, painted an off-white that had seemed relaxing a few hours earlier. Now it felt sterile, hospital-like. The quiet was crushing. My house makes little noises sometimes. Old framing settling, pipes giving tiny groans. But in that moment, everything was so still I could hear my own pulse in my ears. At 2:48, my phone buzzed on the desk, and the sound made me flinch so hard I knocked a pencil off. A text. A known number. "Are you alone in there?" My chest tightened. No greeting, no name, no context. Just that sentence. I typed back, "Who is this?" Delivered. No response. I stared at the message until the screen dimmed, then I turned off the sound entirely. I didn't want to jump again if another came in. At 2:51, the tapping returned. Same pattern. 3 taps. 2 taps. But this time, it was different. The rhythm was off by a fraction of a second, as if someone was imitating the previous pattern but didn't quite remember the spacing. A human trying to mimic a metronome they had only half heard. I stepped back slowly, keeping my eyes on the wall. I wasn't afraid of the wall itself, obviously. But something was on the other side of it, either inside my house or directly against the siding outside. I told myself to get a grip. I needed to check outside before letting panic dictate everything. It was entirely possible the sound was coming from the exterior siding. Could be tree branches. Could be a squirrel. Could be Halden, though the idea made my stomach twist. I went out the front door instead of the back because it felt less exposed. The afternoon light had shifted, stretching shadows across the yard in long, sharp angles. Mine looked warped on the grass, too tall. I tried not to think about that. I circled to the side of the house where the tapping had seemed to come from. Nothing. No branches touching the siding. No animals. No signs of human presence. The narrow strip of grass was empty except for a rake leaning against the fence. A rake I knew I hadn't left there. It wasn't mine. It was old. Wooden handle worn nearly smooth. Teeth spotted with orange rust. I didn't touch it. There was a faint impression on the grass beneath it, as if someone had been standing there holding it for a while. The outline of shoes, not work boots, not sneakers. Something slimmer, almost slipper-like. And the impressions were deep. Whoever had been standing there wasn't light. Go back inside, a voice in my head whispered. Lock the door. Call someone. Anyone. But calling the police felt ridiculous. What would I even say? My neighbor's garage door breathed at me, and I didn't want to give them any reason to brush me off or assume I was hysterical. I needed actual evidence. Something solid. At 3:00, as I stood frozen beside the house, I heard a soft creaking sound behind me, the unmistakable hinge creak of my backyard gate. Slow, deliberate. I turned, expecting to see a raccoon or stray cat squeezing through. Instead, the gate was already still, sitting open about 6 inches. No animal slipping under it. No wind strong enough to move it. Just that small gap that hadn't been there 10 minutes ago. I waited. Nothing moved. I took one step toward it. The gate eased open another inch, not with a slam or a swing, but with a tiny incremental glide, like someone barely nudging it with a fingertip from the other side. I inhaled sharply and stepped back, pulse kicking into my throat. The sun was still bright, the yard still visible, nothing overtly dangerous in sight. But the quiet had shifted. It was the kind that feels coiled, tense, like air before a storm. I didn't check the gate again. I didn't want to know what might be waiting behind it. I went straight inside and locked everything. The front door, the back door, the tiny laundry room door that leads to the side path. I even closed the blinds, something I hardly ever do during the day. At 3:12, I finally sat down on the couch, gripping my phone. The unknown number still hadn't texted back. That somehow felt worse than if they had. Uncertainty is a slow poison. I told myself to distract my mind. Turn on the TV, play music, anything. Then, from the far end of the hallway, I heard the soft click of a light switch. One of the lights turned on. I hadn't touched it. The hallway light is one of those old-style toggles. It clicks distinctly when flipped. And I had turned it off earlier. I was sure of it. I stood, barely breathing, waiting to see if something else would move. A second click. Another light. This time, the one near the bathroom. It wasn't rapid. It wasn't playful. It was steady, one light at a time, moving down the hall toward the living room in slow, even intervals. Each sound was like a footstep. At 3:15, the final switch at the end of the hall flipped on by itself, bathing the living room doorway in a sharp rectangle of light. My phone buzzed in my hand. Same unknown number. I told you not to check. My grip tightened around the phone so hard my knuckles ached. I stared at the message until the letters blurred. I told you not to check. My first instinct was to delete it, wipe it off the screen so it would feel less real, but deleting words doesn't erase intent. Whoever sent it knew I'd gone outside. They knew I'd inspected the siding. They knew I'd noticed the gate. And if they knew that, then they had been close. Very close. I forced myself to inhale slowly. Don't let fear collapse your logic. I texted back, "What do you want?" My finger hovered for a second before hitting send. Delivered. Then nothing. The house felt too bright now with every hall light switched on, as if the lights were pinning me in place. I moved toward the switches to turn them back off, but halfway down the hallway I stopped. The final switch, the one nearest the living room, rested at a perfect 45-degree angle, not fully up, not fully down. Balanced. Someone had to have positioned it that way with deliberate care. Toggle switches don't land like that naturally. My breath froze in my chest. I wasn't imagining any of this. At 3:21, I forced myself to straighten it. Just flip it down, I thought. And this weird equilibrium. But the moment I touched it, a faint sound came from the other side of the living room wall. A tiny scrape, like a fingernail dragged lightly along drywall. I jerked my hand away. The scraping repeated, slightly longer this time, following the movement of my fingertips along the switch. No more. I backed away, heart hammering in my throat. I didn't know what was happening, but instincts don't lie. This wasn't random. Someone was watching my reactions. Someone wanted me to know they were. I went back to the living room couch, sat down, and didn't move. I tried calling the unknown number, but it rang once and then cut off. A moment later, a new text arrived. "Stay where I can see you." Ice flooded my chest. I looked automatically toward the front window. The blinds were closed, slats angled down. No one could see in directly. Not unless they were very close, peering through the tiny gaps. "Stay where I can see you." I didn't want to check. I didn't want to lift the blinds even an inch. But not knowing was worse than knowing. Slowly, carefully, I reached for the cord and raised one slat with a fingertip. The street outside looked normal. Empty. Afternoon sunlight reflecting off parked cars. No figures standing close enough to see in. No shadows tucked under the eaves. Nothing. But as I let the slat fall back into place, another text appeared. My entire body seized. They'd seen me check. They had eyes on me. Whether through a gap in a blind, a reflection on the TV, a window I'd forgotten was cracked open, I didn't know. But they had a visual. They knew. I needed to call the police now. Screw sounding paranoid. Screw evidence. Someone was actively watching me from somewhere on my property. That alone was enough for a welfare check. I dialed 911. I didn't get to say anything. The call rang once, then cut instantly to busy tone. Not call failed. Not no signal. Busy tone. Who even hears a busy signal anymore? I tried again. Busy. On the third attempt, my phone vibrated with an incoming call from the unknown number. My heart felt like it jumped against my ribs. I didn't answer. The ringing stopped after 2 cycles. Another text. Don't call them again. That was it. No threat. No demand. Just a directive, like they expected obedience. I stood abruptly and paced, trying to force my thoughts into straight lines. Someone on my property, someone watching me, someone preventing emergency calls. It didn't make sense. It wasn't logical. It wasn't doable, unless the person was using a jammer, or spoofing numbers, or physically sitting near some kind of signal blocker. At 3:34, a soft thump came from the guest bedroom at the back of the house. A dull, flat sound. Not like something falling, more like something being set down gently on the floor. The guest room door was closed. I approached slowly, pulse pounding. Each step felt like crossing a tightrope over darkness. The hallway lights bathed everything in a flat, unnatural brightness that made my skin crawl. I put my hand on the guest room doorknob and felt a faint vibration, like something tapping lightly against the inside of the door. Not enough to rattle it, just enough to feel. I whispered, "Is someone in there?" Silence. I wasn't going to open the door. I might have been scared, but I wasn't suicidal. Instead, I leaned close enough to listen for even the smallest sound. Breathing, moving, shifting. Nothing. I backed away and had made it 3 steps down the hall when the doorknob clicked. Just once. Not turning, not rattling. Just a tiny, unmistakable click, like the internal latch had been gently released. Horror froze my legs. That door had been fully shut. If the latch had clicked open, someone had toggled it from inside. My phone buzzed again. Another text. You weren't supposed to hear that. That did it. Panic cut the leash. I grabbed my keys from the bowl by the door, yanked open the front door, and sprinted to my car without looking back. The air outside felt heavy, wrong, like the atmosphere itself was warped. As I threw myself into the driver's seat, I noticed something that didn't compute at first. My passenger side window was rolled halfway down. I hadn't rolled it down. I hadn't been in the car since yesterday. There was something in the front passenger footwell. Something small. I didn't get a good look before I slammed the lock button and jammed the key into the ignition with shaking hands. The engine turned over. My phone buzzed. Another text. Where are you going? The message lit up my screen again before I even finished backing out of the driveway. Where are you going? I didn't answer. Couldn't. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely grip the wheel. I reversed too fast and clipped the corner of my trash bin, knocking it onto its side. I didn't stop. I didn't care. The only thought in my head was distance, getting away from my house, from that guest room door, from the windows, the hall lights, the tapping. I pulled onto the street and accelerated harder than I meant to. The houses slid past in a solid blur. Bright afternoon sun flashed in staccato bursts through the breaks between trees, and each flash felt like a camera shutter aimed straight at me. At 3:40, I reached the end of my block and turned left. My eyes flicked to the rearview mirror. My house sat halfway down the street, looking perfectly normal. No movement, no figure, no one standing near the windows. I should have felt relief, but all I felt was dread, because my passenger side window was still rolled halfway down, and the air coming through it carried a faint smell that didn't belong in a clean car, something damp, metallic, and cold, like old tools left in a basement. At the red light, I dared a glance at the footwell. A small object rested there, but squarish. Too dark to be anything harmless like a fallen wallet or charger. I reached down with one hand, still watching the road, and touched it with the tip of my finger. Plastic. Smooth. The casing of some kind. The light turned green before I could grab it, and the car behind me honked. I shot forward, heart thudding, and a moment later another text buzzed. Don't look at that. My stomach hollowed out. I hadn't picked it up. I'd barely brushed it. But they knew. Every time I crossed a boundary, checking the siding, lifting the blind, touching a switch, they responded. They were watching me now. I forced myself to breathe slowly through clenched teeth and drove toward the main road. The next text arrived almost immediately. Go back home. The order made my whole body stiffen. I didn't answer. I didn't slow down. I merged onto the road heading south, away from my neighborhood. Another message. Turn around. Then a second later. You're making this harder. I didn't reply. My mind was a mess, but beneath all the fear, something else had begun to surface. Anger. Someone had entered my property, tampered with my house, left something inside my car. They had gotten close enough to smell the air I breathed. And they thought they could dictate where I went? I tightened my hands on the wheel and sped up. At 3:46, my phone began ringing again, unknown number. I hit decline. It rang again. Decline. Decline. Then silence. Then, almost immediately, another text. If you don't stop the car, I will. A chill ran down my back so cold it felt wet. I glanced at the dashboard and saw the traction control warning light flicker on even though the road was bone dry. Then flicker again. Then stay on. The steering wheel gave the faintest tug to the right, A subtle correction I hadn't made. My heart punched upward into my throat. Modern cars have driver assist functions, traction controls, electronic stabilizers. I knew all that, but they don't steer by themselves. Not like this. Not on a straight dry road at 40 miles an hour. I slowed down, gripping the wheel hard. The tug stopped. Another text arrived. My chest felt like it was collapsing inward. This was impossible. No one could remotely access a car like that. No one could cut off 911 calls. No one could text with such perfect timing unless they were in range. Unless they were close enough to see everything I did in real time. Unless they were in the car. My skin crawled so violently it felt like it might split. I forced myself to look at the rearview mirror. Nothing. Just the empty back seat. But that didn't calm me. I glanced at the passenger seat. Also empty. But the smell from the open window was stronger, damp metal and something faintly like cold sweat. I knew I had to pull over. Not because they told me. Because I needed answers. I needed to see what was in the footwell. I needed to know what they put in my car. At 3:50, I turned into a gas station, the kind with 2 pumps, an ice machine, and a small store attached. A truck was filling up. A woman was scraping bug splatter off her windshield. Normal life. Blissful, mundane normal life. I parked at the far end of the lot and killed the engine. The quiet inside the car felt predatory. My phone buzzed before I even reached for the mystery object. Keep your hands where I can see them. I froze. Another text. Don't get out. My breath hitched. The normal instinct would have been to run toward other people, scream if I had to. But a deeper, primal instinct told me the opposite. Don't expose them. Don't draw attention. Whoever was doing this wasn't improvising, they were following steps. And I had no idea what step next looked like. I slowly raised my hands until they hovered near the steering wheel where any pair of watching eyes, human or camera or otherwise, could see them. I whispered, barely audible, "What do you want from me?" A text came through instantly. Look down. My throat tightened so fast it hurt. Very slowly, I lowered my eyes to the passenger side footwell. The black plastic object sat exactly where I left it. Only now it wasn't alone. A phone, cheap, gray, scratched screen, lay beside it. Perfectly positioned. Its camera lens was aimed directly at me. My own reflection stared back in the black glass. The device lit up before I touched anything. A timer application was running, counting down. 14 seconds. 13 seconds. 12 seconds. For a moment I couldn't even process the numbers ticking downward. My mind couldn't pair the situation with anything logical. A timer meant something was supposed to happen at 0. Something orchestrated. Something planned. My pulse slammed so violently in my throat I could barely swallow. 11 seconds. 10 seconds. I didn't touch the phone. I didn't move an inch. Every part of my body was locked in place, held there by a mix of terror and a dim, buzzing disbelief. I felt like I had stepped outside my own life into someone else's nightmare. 9 seconds. 8 seconds. My own phone buzzed in my lap. A text. Don't move. I wasn't planning on it. 7 seconds. 6 seconds. The counting grew louder in my mind even though the phone itself made no noise. I could feel each number like a heartbeat under my skin. 5 seconds. My breath stuttered. For seconds. A woman at the pump closest to me was humming to herself, completely oblivious. 3 seconds. A warm breeze swept across the lot. 2 seconds. I clenched my teeth. 1 second. The timer hit 0. Nothing happened. Just like that, no sound, no vibration, no explosion, no alarm. The display simply froze on midnight, the digits unchanging, the phone suddenly inert. For 3 seconds I didn't trust it. I stared at it like it might leap to life again. Then my own phone buzzed. My chest burned with an anger I wasn't expecting, not hot, not loud, but cold and sharp, like something breaking cleanly inside me. I whispered under my breath, "What is wrong with you?" It wasn't a question for them. It wasn't even meant to be heard. It was just a small sound to keep myself from slipping under the panic. Another text arrived. Put both devices in the glove box. A demand, not a suggestion. I stared at the two objects. The cheap gray phone still displayed the frozen timer. The black plastic box beside it sat innocently, but something about it felt deeply wrong. Like touching it would be crossing a threshold I couldn't step back from. My instinct said don't obey. Don't participate in whatever game this is. Don't give them control. But another instinct, older, more primal, said something else. They're escalating because you aren't listening. You don't know where they are. You don't know what they can do. Comply until you get a chance to escape. I reached out slowly, grabbed the gray phone first, and nudged the glove box open with my knee. The hinge groaned softly. The compartment was nearly empty, just a manual and an old pair of sunglasses. I placed the phone inside. I hesitated before touching the black device, but I forced my fingers to close around it. It was surprisingly cold, like it had been sitting in a freezer, not a sunlit car. I dropped it into the glove box and shut the compartment. My phone buzzed instantly. "Now get out." My lungs seized. I stared at the text, reading it again to make sure I hadn't misinterpreted it. "Leave the car." I didn't move. Another text. I looked around the lot. Normal people doing normal things. A man walking out of the store with a bag of chips. An SUV pulling up to the air pump. No one watching me. Or maybe everyone was. And the problem was I didn't know who. My fingers hovered over the lock button. I wasn't stepping out into open air without marking my surroundings first. I checked the mirrors, rear view, left, right. All empty. No one close enough to see into the glove box. No one close enough to whisper instructions. My pulse felt like a drumline. I unlocked the door. The click sounded too loud. I stepped out slowly, keeping my hands visible, half expecting someone to walk up and grab me. But nothing happened. The breeze brushed my face. The sunlight felt too warm, too bright, too normal. For a moment it almost made me dizzy. Another text. Walk to the back of the car. I didn't want to. I didn't want to turn my back on the gas station store, the road, the pumps, anywhere someone could approach without me noticing. But refusing didn't feel like an option. I stepped behind my car, the gravel under my shoes crunching quietly. The moment I reached the rear bumper, my phone buzzed again. Look down. I swallowed hard and forced my eyes downward. Something was tucked under the edge of my rear license plate. A folded piece of paper. With edges slightly creased, like it had been handled roughly before being placed there. I crouched slowly and slid it free with trembling fingers. It was a printed photo. My photo. Taken from behind the slats of my living room blinds. My silhouette sitting on the couch. My exact posture, my head tilted the same way it had been when I stared at my phone earlier. Someone had been right outside my window. Inches away. Close enough to hear my breathing if I'd been quiet. My knees wobbled. I turned the photo over with shaking hands. On the back, written in thin, precise handwriting, "You shouldn't have left." Before I could react, before I could bolt, before I could scream, my phone vibrated again. "I told you I can see you wherever you go." I snapped my head up, scanning the entire lot, every angle, every car, every person. But no one was watching me. No one reacted. Everyone looked like strangers in their own little worlds. Then one more message arrived. "Go back home. Or someone else will." For several seconds I just stood there behind my car, holding that photograph like it might burn through my fingers. Go back home. Or someone else will. The air around me suddenly felt thinner, like the atmosphere itself had shrunk. My brain tried to push the threat away, tell me it was a bluff, but the handwriting on the back of the photo was too careful, too intentional. Someone had planned this. Someone who knew exactly where I lived. Someone who had already been inside my house. I backed toward the driver's side door, never taking my eyes off the lot. Every driver, every customer, every shadow cast by a car felt suspicious. It was impossible to tell who looked at me naturally and who watched through a reflection or a phone screen or a tinted window. My phone buzzed again. Just that single word. I opened the car door, slid inside, and hit the lock button so hard the plastic creaked. The moment the lock clicked, my shoulders slumped, not in relief, but in resignation. I felt caged again, and they had been nudging me back inside from the beginning. I put the car in gear. My hands were damp on the steering wheel. I didn't want to go home. Every cell in my body tensed at the idea of stepping back into that hallway, those lights, that scratched garage door next door, that guest room where the latch had clicked. But the threat wasn't abstract anymore. It wasn't vague paranoia or creepy timing. Someone else will. Someone else who? A neighbor? A friend? A stranger walking a dog? The woman humming at the pump? I couldn't risk it. I pulled out of the gas station at 3:58, heading back toward my neighborhood. The roads looked completely mundane. Cars passing, kids on bikes, a man gardening. It was a sunny day. There should have been no reason for my hands shaking on the wheel. Halfway home, another text came. Don't stop for anything. My jaw clenched. My breath felt thick. At 4:04 I turned onto my street. The houses all looked harmless in the slanting afternoon light. My house stood exactly as I'd left it, blinds drawn, quiet, empty-looking. No sign of intrusion. No broken windows. No marks near the door. For a moment, I wondered if I had actually gone insane. If everything had been some orchestrated prank or delusion triggered by stress. But then I remembered the scent inside the car. The window rolled down, the black device, the timer, the precise photographs. This wasn't in my head. I parked in the driveway and sat there for a full minute, engine idling, staring at the front door. My phone vibrated again. Go inside. Every part of me rejected the idea. Going back in meant stepping into a controlled space, controlled by someone who wasn't me. But refusing wasn't an option. They had leverage I didn't understand and reach I couldn't measure. I killed the engine and stepped out of the car slowly, eyes scanning every direction. There was no one in sight. The breeze had picked up. The leaves of the tree near my driveway rustled like quiet applause. The porch steps creaked under my weight. My phone buzzed again. Leave the front door unlocked. A cold wave traveled down my spine. My thumb hovered over the screen, debating typing something. What do you want from me? Why are you doing this? But every message I'd sent before had gone unanswered. They only responded when I acted, never when I questioned. I pushed the door open. The faint smell of my house, wood polish, laundry detergent, stale coffee, hit me all at once. Normal scents, comforting ones. But now they felt foreign. I stepped inside, leaving the door ajar as instructed. Immediately, the house felt wrong. Warmer. So, like the air had been recently disturbed. I half expected to see footprints in the carpet or objects moved slightly out of place. But everything looked identical to how I'd left it. Another text. Go to the hallway. My legs felt weak as I stepped forward, the boards under my shoes giving little groans that sounded too loud. The hallway lights were still on. All of them. Leading in a perfect line toward the guest bedroom. I didn't want to look. I didn't want to go near that door. But the text buzzed again. Open it. The guest bedroom door. My mouth went dry. From here, I could see the knob, still turned slightly downward in that unnatural resting position. exactly the way it had been right after the latch clicked from the inside. I stepped closer, each footstep feeling like an agreement with something I didn't understand. When I reached the door, I lifted my hand and wrapped my fingers around the knob. It moved too easily, like someone had just used it. I slowly pushed the door open. The room was empty, completely empty. Everything was exactly where it should be. The bed neatly made, the dresser closed, the curtains drawn halfway. No boxes moved. No shadows out of place. No sign of a person ever being inside. But the air felt wrong. Slightly humid, like someone had stood there breathing heavily. I stepped inside slowly, scanning every corner. The closet was shut. I knew instantly I wasn't opening it. I couldn't. Not yet. Another text arrived. My phone buzzed again before I could breathe. Check under the bed. That was too much. My voice cracked in the empty room. No. No, no, no. Another buzz. Do it. I dropped to my knees, heart hammering so loud I could hear it in my ears. The carpet fibers brushed my face as I crouched low. The space under the bed looked dark, unnaturally dark, like the shadows had weight. I lowered my head further. There was something under there. Not a person. Not an animal. A phone. Face down. A second identical cheap gray phone. Suddenly, it lit up. Its screen showed a live camera view. The camera was pointed directly at my face. But the image wasn't from the phone under the bed. It was from somewhere behind me. A perspective that didn't exist. A perspective inside the room. My phone vibrated one more time. Don't turn around. For a second I couldn't breathe. The words on my screen vibrated in my vision, blurring into one white-hot spike of terror. Don't turn around. My throat constricted so hard it hurt. The room behind me felt like it expanded and contracted at the same time, like the air itself pushed against my back. The phone under the bed showed a live camera feed. My face pressed close to the carpet. My eyes wide. My shoulders hunched. But from behind me. From a height. From a position that shouldn't exist unless someone was standing in the doorway. I didn't move. Couldn't. My muscles locked so completely I might as well have been pinned. My phone buzzed again in my hand. Stay still. I tried to swallow, but my mouth had gone so dry it felt like sand scraping down my throat. My skin crawled, every hair on my arms standing stiff. I kept my eyes locked on the phone screen under the bed. Whoever held the other camera shifted slightly, a tiny tilt as though adjusting their grip. The angle changed just enough to show more of the top of my head. Someone was right behind me. I felt absolutely nothing. No breath, no footsteps, no shadow passing over me. But the camera didn't lie. Whoever it was had been letting me kneel there, letting me see their perspective, silently watching me as I stared into the darkness. My phone buzzed again. Don't make a sound. A soft electrical hum filled my ears, but it wasn't coming from the room. It was inside my head, rising with panic. I forced myself to inhale through my nose, slow, controlled, praying I wouldn't break down into shaking or sobbing. The phone under the bed flickered suddenly, as though the signal glitched. The live feed warped for half a second, lines streaking across the image, and then the perspective changed again. The camera was now lower, angled slightly to the right. Whoever held it had crouched. Right behind me. My body shuddered involuntarily. A new text came in. Stand up. Everything in me screamed not to. Standing would expose my back, put me inches away from someone I couldn't see. But I knew what would happen if I didn't obey. They had been escalating every time I resisted. My knees felt like they were made of brittle wire as I slowly pushed myself upright. The carpet brushed against my palms as I rose. On the phone under the bed, the camera angle rose with me. Whoever was filming was standing up too. I didn't turn around. My breathing had gone shallow and fast. My heart thudded so violently I felt it in my wrists, my temples, my teeth. The silence behind me felt like a held breath. Another message. Walk to the window. My legs moved before my brain processed the command. Each step felt like wading through thickened air. The curtains were half drawn, leaving a sliver of daylight slicing through the room. I reached them, stopping just short of the beam of light. Open them. I lifted a corner of the curtain with trembling fingers. Outside, my quiet neighborhood looked painfully normal. A neighbor across the street watered her lawn. A jogger passed by in the distance. A dog barked somewhere 2 houses over. Nothing out of place. Nothing watching. Nothing threatening. A false sense of reality pressed against the horror behind me, making everything feel surreal, split in two. My phone buzzed. Looked down the street. I followed the direction the message implied, sliding my gaze along the sidewalk toward the far end of the block. A black sedan was parked at the corner. Windows tinted. Engine running. As I stared, the driver's side window slid down halfway. My phone buzzed again. My breath hitched. This wasn't a request, it was a test. A demonstration. They wanted me to show I knew they were watching. I lifted my hand and gave the smallest, most reluctant wave I had ever made in my life. The person in the sedan didn't wave back. The window slid shut. Then the car pulled away slowly, turning the corner until it disappeared. Another message appeared instantly. Now go to your living room. I stepped back from the window. The sensation of a presence behind me grew sharper, thicker, like gravity bending toward me. I didn't hear breathing. I didn't hear shoes. But I felt watched with a level of intent I'd never encountered in my life. I walked out of the guest bedroom without looking over my shoulder. I couldn't. There was a primal force holding my neck rigid, refusing to let me break the rule. At 4:23, I reached the living room. The blinds remained shut exactly how I'd left them before I fled the house earlier. The couch cushion still bore the faint imprint of where I'd sat. My phone buzzed. So I lowered myself onto the couch. The room felt smaller now, as though the walls had shifted a few inches closer. My pulse throbbed at the base of my skull. Another message. Don't talk. Don't move. Seconds passed. Then a minute. Then another. The house was silent except for the faint electrical hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. I strained to hear footsteps, breathing, anything behind me, but there was nothing. Just the suffocating stillness of a home no longer mine. At 4:29, another text arrived. Look at the TV. My throat constricted. The TV was off. But as I stared, the screen flickered, once, twice, and then turned on by itself. A video feed appeared. My own living room, filmed from above. A camera angle I knew didn't exist. Not mounted. Not hidden. Not possible. The top view showed me sitting exactly where I was. But it also showed something else. A shape standing directly behind me. Not clear. Not fully visible. Just a black silhouette. Motionless. Inches from the back of my head. My hands shook uncontrollably. Another text buzzed. Don't turn around. The silhouette on the screen didn't move, but the shadow it cast slowly lengthened over my shoulders. I felt the air behind me shift, not a breeze, but displacement, as if something leaned closer. Another message arrived. This is the only warning you get. My eyes welded themselves to the screen. The shadow behind me stretched further. Another text came through. If you turn around before I tell you. The typing dots appeared. My heart stopped. Someone will die. My pulse slammed so hard against my ribs I thought the sound alone might give me away. Someone will die. The words glowed on my phone like a lit fuse, each letter burning its way down my spine. I didn't know who someone meant. Me, a neighbor, a stranger on the street. but the certainty in the phrasing left no room for doubt. It wasn't a threat. It was a statement of fact. The silhouette on the TV stayed perfectly still behind me. A dark imprint, featureless, almost human-shaped but not quite. Too tall. Too narrow at the center. Too solid at the edges. My breath came in shallow pulses as I stared at the screen, refusing to blink. I didn't dare. Somehow blinking felt like it might signal something I wasn't supposed to signal. My phone buzzed again. Stay still. I didn't move. Not even to breathe deeper. The air behind me felt heavier than before, thick, as if it had been displaced by something tall and unmoving. The hairs at the base of my neck prickled upward, one by one, like they were trying to warn me. Another message. You're doing well. I wanted to scream, or run, or break down into shaking sobs. But none of those were options now. Panic was a trap, one they were waiting for me to fall into. My phone vibrated again. I'm going to ask you a question. Don't lie. My throat tightened painfully. Another message arrived instantly, like they were reading the tension in my breathing. Why did you go outside earlier? Of all the questions I expected, that wasn't it. Not what do you want from me, not who are you, not what did you see. They wanted to know why I stepped outside. My fingers hovered over the screen. Typing anything felt dangerous. Not typing felt worse. Finally, slowly I typed. I heard something. Delivered. Second later. What did you hear? I swallowed hard. Tapping. The typing dots appeared nearly instantly. And you thought it was me? I stared at the message, my mind twisting itself into knots. I typed, I didn't know who it was. Another pause. It wasn't me. The room somehow dropped 10 degrees. My blood felt like ice. If it wasn't them tapping, then there had been someone else. Another person. Another presence. The garage. The siding against my house. The wall behind my office. The scratches by the garage door. Another text. Why did you knock on Halden's garage? My mouth went dry. I didn't want to. I thought he might need help. The reply came without hesitation. He didn't. My heart clenched. I typed, fingers shaking. Is he alive? The typing dots flickered. For now. A violent chill rolled through me so fast I almost doubled over. I forced myself to keep still, eyes locked on the TV screen. The silhouette behind me still hadn't moved. Not a millimeter. It was like it wasn't breathing, wasn't shifting its weight, like it wasn't bound by the tiny involuntary motions living bodies make. My phone buzzed again. Don't worry about him. A second message arrived immediately after. Worry about yourself. My breath stilled. Another text. You've been making mistakes today. My skin crawled. Stepping outside. Checking the siding. Touching the switch. Leaving the house. Stopping the car. My pulse thudded. I typed, hands trembling. What do you want me to do? The reply came in two parts. First, I want you to understand something. You were never supposed to notice me. My lungs seized. My vision narrowed. Every memory from the last few hours crashed into me at once. The footsteps inside the garage, the scratches, the breathing at the bottom of the door, the lights turning on one by one, the gate inching open. I typed, why today? There was a long pause, long enough that for a moment I thought they were done. Then the typing dots reappeared. Because today you looked at the house too long. I frowned despite the terror. Looked at the house? Another message. At 1:31 this afternoon, you glanced at the garage for exactly 6 seconds. 6 seconds? I typed, I don't remember that. The reply came instantly. I do. A cold wave rippled down my spine. The typing dots returned. And you weren't supposed to. The silhouette on the TV shifted. Just a tiny movement, barely a tilt, but enough to make a sickening jolt run through my gut. The image wobbled slightly, as if whoever held the camera behind me had adjusted their stance. I felt nothing physically behind me, no warmth, no presence, no breath, but the movement on the screen was undeniable. My phone buzzed again. "You didn't follow the rules." My fingers trembled over the screen. I didn't know there were rules. The reply came fast. "There are always rules. You just didn't pay attention." The silhouette on the screen leaned forward. A faint, barely perceptible shift, but the shadow stretched over the back of the couch now, reaching toward my shoulder. Another text. "Do you hear it now?" My breath hitched. Silence. A soft sound behind me. An almost imperceptible disturbance in the air. Not breathing. Not footsteps. Just the quietest, faintest exhale, warm enough to brush across the top of my ear. My entire body locked rigid. On the TV, the silhouette hovered inches from where my neck was exposed. My phone buzzed again. "This is your last chance." The typing dots returned. "Don't look at me." I stared at the TV, at the dark shape looming over me. Another text. "Or someone dies." My fingers clenched around my phone. Another message came through, slow this time. "Measured. Now stand up." My legs wouldn't move at first. It took all the strength I had to uncoil them, to lift my body up from the couch. The moment I rose, the shadow on the screen rose with me, perfectly synchronized, as if tethered to my spine. Another message. "Walk toward the hallway." I took one step. Then another. The silhouette followed. My phone buzzed. "You're going to open the front door." My breath shuddered. Another text. "And you're not going to look behind you." My vision blurred with panic. But I moved. Because some part of me understood. Whatever rose behind me wasn't something my mind was meant to see. My feet felt like they were moving through syrup as I stepped toward the hallway. Every sound in the house sharpened unnaturally. The faint hum of the refrigerator, the click of the cooling car outside, the distant bark of a dog somewhere down the street. Normal noises. Harmless noises. But they all felt wrong because none of them masked the quiet behind me. There was no breathing. No footsteps. Just the unmistakable sensation of proximity, of something tall, something intent, something close enough that if I lifted a hand too far back, I might brush against it. My phone buzzed. "Don't slow down." I didn't. I couldn't. My legs carried me forward on instinct more than will, each step careful and precise, as though a single misstep might break whatever fragile boundary kept me alive. The hallway lights, still on from earlier, stretched ahead of me in a blinding row. They looked too bright, too sharp. The shadows they cast felt deliberate, shaped with intention. And as I moved, I could see it. My shadow. And another one behind it. Not a full silhouette. Not a crisp shape. More like a smear of darkness that stretched unnaturally long, as if its source wasn't obeying the angle of the ceiling lights. The shadow trailed me, not quite touching mine, but close enough to overlap at the edges. My phone buzzed again. "Don't look down." I kept my eyes forward. My hand shook as I reached for the front door. The same door I'd left unlocked. The same doorway that had felt like escape earlier. Now it felt like a threshold someone else wanted me to cross. My fingers brushed the cold metal of the deadbolt. Another text. "Open it." Slowly, I slid the latch back. The quiet click sounded deafening. The door creaked as I pulled it open an inch, then two, then a full foot. Warm late afternoon air pressed into the hallway. Cars passed occasionally on the street. A child's bicycle sat abandoned on the neighboring lawn. The world outside looked normal, but the problem was inside. Another text. "Step onto the porch." My throat tightened. I stepped forward. My foot crossed over the threshold, landing on the wooden plank. For the first time in hours, sunlight hit the back of my neck. My skin prickled violently. My phone buzzed. Don't turn around. Just step outside fully. I did. My other foot followed. I felt exposed, utterly exposed, as if every passerby, every neighbor, every set of eyes could see the terror clinging to me like static. The porch boards creaked. Another text. Now close the door behind you. A jolt of fear shot through me so sharp I almost choked. Close the door? Lock myself out? Trap whatever was behind me inside my house? Or trap myself outside? But refusing wasn't an option. My hand trembled violently as I pushed the door halfway shut. The angle allowed me to see the empty living room behind it. Couch, coffee table, blinds, everything still and undisturbed. Just as the gap narrowed further, I saw movement. Not clear, not distinct, but something dark, sliding out of the hallway, toward me. My fingers spasmed, and I slammed the door shut with a force that rattled the deadbolt. My phone buzzed immediately. Lock it. I fumbled with the key, twisted it in the lock, and heard the metallic click echo unnaturally through the frame. The moment it locked, something brushed the other side of the door. Not a knock, not a pound, a gentle drag, like fingertips trailing down wood. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over the edge of the welcome mat. My breath came out in ragged bursts, my chest tightening with every second I stood there. Another text. Walk to your driveway. I didn't want to go back toward my car, toward the shadows under it, toward the open view of the neighborhood street. But I couldn't stay on the porch. I couldn't stay by that door. I walked. My legs shook violently. Each step toward the driveway felt like peeling myself away from a gravitational pull. The sunlight felt too warm, burning against my face. My vision doubled briefly before snapping back. My phone buzzed again. So, I froze. The text came instantly after. Now look at your car. I turned my gaze slowly. My car sat exactly where I'd left it. No movement. No open doors. No shadows shifting inside. Just a normal car. Normal. But the glove box was open. Wide open. I inhaled sharply. Another text arrived. You didn't lock it. My pulse spiked. I knew I had hit the lock button. I had slammed it earlier. I remembered the click. I remembered the sound. But the car had been opened anyway. A new text. Go look inside. Every instinct I had screamed not to. I didn't want to look. I didn't want to know. But the shape that had followed me through the house, the shadow, still felt close, even with a door locked between us. Moving toward the car felt safer than staying still. I approached slowly, scanning the interior through the windows. The seats looked empty. The timer phone was still inside the glove box, screen dark. The black device sat beside it like a dead insect. Another buzz. Open the passenger door. I reached for the handle, pulling it open with a trembling hand. The smell hit me first. Damp metal. Warm breath. Sweat. And then I saw it. Another photo. Placed neatly on the passenger seat. A photo of me. Standing on my porch. Taken seconds ago. The angle was low, ground level, pointed upward. Taken from inches away from where my feet had been. Someone had been right there at the porch steps. Right beneath me. My stomach twisted violently. Another message. Now do you understand? I typed, hands shaking uncontrollably. Understand what? The reply came at once. I've been here all day. I staggered back from the car, nearly dropping my phone. You just never looked in the right places. I stared at the screen, my vision tunneling. A final message came through. And you still haven't. Before I could react, before I could turn, before I could breathe, something warm exhaled against the back of my neck. Not a breeze. Not wind. Not my imagination. A breath. A long, slow breath. Right behind me. I didn't turn. I didn't move. I didn't scream. Because some part of me already knew. Turning around was never the danger. Seeing where it was standing was. And the last thing I remember before everything went black was the shape of a shadow stretching far longer than anything human should ever cast.